Hi, I'm Mark Rush Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. As part of our Prodigy Search Presents interview series, we are speaking with a few members of our D&I Board of Advisors, as they play a major role advocating for change within their organizations and also within the sports and entertainment industries. Our goal with this mini-series is to continue to educate and provide guidance to sports and entertainment leaders as our D&I board members share valuable insights and best practices. With that in mind, we're here for a few questions with Ron Lee. Ron, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure, Mark.
So by way of quick background, Ron is the Director of Growth and Commercialization for esports with Electronic Arts. Previously, he was with the PGA Tour International Affairs. While pursuing his MBA from the University of Oregon, he completed various projects for both Nike and GlideSlope. Let's jump right in, Ron, if you're okay with that. And I think your story is very fascinating in terms of the places you've lived, where you've traveled around the globe, not the least of which going to college in Canada, and again, for both work and pleasure, that you are all the world travel that we need to talk to for a few of these topics. Tell the audience, I think what a good thing for them to hear would be some of your stops along the way, for those that don't know your story, but also how you feel those locations brought value to you in understanding how different cultures work. When meeting with people, with networking, building relationships, how have your travels kind of frame that for you?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Mark. To kind of give the audience a little bit of a background, I was super lucky to have been exposed to a ton of different cultures growing up. I'll only take credit for the back half of it as an adult, but I think the whole story has really played a role in why I think I've been really blessed to have a lot more perspective because of so much time spent with different cultures. So I was born in Hong Kong in 1987. And my family was, we were a bunch of expats, really, a bunch of local expats. My dad worked for a German company named Metro, which is basically the Costco of Germany. And it was at this point when Hong Kong was kind of like the commercial gateway to doing business in China. If you're foreign, if you didn't know what you were doing, Hong Kong was kind of like your connection point to getting in there. And so because of that, I was I was really lucky. I spent a lot of time as a traveling brat with my dad, spent a lot of time in Germany with him, spent a lot of time in seeing manufacturing sort of hotspots in China. We spent a lot of time in Oceania, Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore were particularly places that we spent a lot of time in. And all that sort of time took me to spend so much time in different countries, mostly on short spurts, but there were also periods in there in which I lived in Germany for about a year, lived in Singapore for a little while. For all intents and purposes, I really grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia. Spent most of my formative years, ended up going to university there. And when I was in grad school, actually at Oregon, I also spent a little bit over a summer as well back in Singapore. And now I find myself in the United States. All that's to say is I've been really, lucky to have experienced a lot of both developing and developed cultures. I guess if you really want to just generally describe them, Western, Eastern Hemisphere cultures. Been really lucky to kind of see how a lot of the world thinks. And to kind of get back to answering your question, I think how that's really manifested today for myself is it's helped me build so much more perspective. When you understand how different groups of people think, their headspace, their worldview, I think it just helps you be helps you be more empathetic and, forget business. Just trying to when you're trying to build connections with people, there's no better way to know. And there's no better way to build connection and a relationship with somebody than understand where they're coming from. As it relates to a sense of business, it has really helped train to give me that savvy to think ahead of time on how my team should act. It can be as basic as that, or it can be generally around mannerisms. Let's say, for example, if this is a sales prospect, there's probably certain etiquette that we should follow. If we're going to visit them, it's so important that we respect people's culture. And this is where I think, and I experienced this a lot at the PGA Tour because golf is an extremely popular sport over in Asia. When you start spending a lot of time working for a Western business, trying to develop business in a totally different area of the world, I think a lot of my colleagues there went through a lot of shock, and having all those experiences was particularly helpful for that. And I imagine as the world continues to globalize, I mean, you and I were just talking about how the world now is more online than ever. I think that will become even more paramount to being able to successfully create relationships.
I'd love to stay with the PGA Tour for a second, because that was a good chunk of your career, and you accomplished a lot during time with the tour. You were with the tour for nearly 5 years in an international capacity, and I'm curious, because you started to talk about that just a second ago, and might as well stay down that path, is curious about how that role heightened your awareness. You start to talk about, frankly, your upbringing, but let's talk about how the tour role heightened your awareness of global perspective, right? Being open to fresh ideas, new approaches to conducting business, new approaches to solving problems. Just again, that experience, I'm sure, might have opened your eyes quite a bit to again, the way you meet with people, to your point about customers, but also just having a different perspective. And that tour, hopefully that tour position played a role in enhancing your kind of business credentials and skill set.
Yeah, I think the most interesting part of working at the PGA Tour was, it's funny. Mark, I was there from 2014 to 2019, and even in the 2010s, if you asked the sports fan or you told a sports fan that the PGA Tour hadn't really even thought about itself that internationally, I think that would floor a lot of people. Because at the end of the day, if you think about sort of the spectrum of sports we have to play with here in North America, golf is up there, like in terms of international appeal, but the tour for a long time considered itself the best golf tour in the world that happened to be based in the US. But it had made sort of this philosophical pivot at this point, when a couple of years before I joined, that it just wanted to be the world's golf tour. And as such, it had to start thinking that way. And so it was really interesting to be within the organization as it was making that change. And so you heard a lot of, there was a lot of chatter around, like, say, for example, our distribution business. When we're trying to be a little bit more active and thinking about what we're going to do about it, the conversation changes from, we'll take this deal that lands on us, to no, we're going to go pursue things that make strategic sense to us. And so with that comes new business development. With that came hiring Europeans. With that came hiring Japanese folks. With that came hiring Chinese folks to help us out. Anybody, just, name where golf has any relevance, and odds are we spent some time in there. And so they're seeing all those growing pangs that a company that is trying to globalize went through was an incredibly interesting experience for me. I think things, I had taken a lot of things for granted. Like I guess with a lot of things, when it comes to international experiences, you just get it or you don't, right? And usually that comes as a product of having that experience. And I've never been put into that state of mind where I had to consciously think about it. And it's wildly interesting, Mark, because EA is, despite EA's scale, Asia is also a place that Asia is also a geography that it's looking to substantially grow, because it's a place that it just really hasn't had a huge track record compared to a lot of our competitors. So as an organization goes through that evolution of trying to take on more of the world and to become more of a global business, what are the sort of things and sort of roadblocks that can come up? And this might sound so naive, but just kind of having courtside seats to it and being able to help out with the effort at the PGA Tour helped me think about all the little things that I never did before. I'll give you even an example, things, forget sort of big picture thoughts like how you proceed over the course of developing a relationship, how should outreach work, who should visit who, etiquette. Even from that all the way down to instructing people on, here's how you should exchange business cards in certain cultures. None of it was really off the table when you really hit that reset button and think about how you do this from the ground up. And I found that just so wildly interesting. And I think if there's anything I will probably take from me from the PGA Tour, or sorry, from my experience at the PGA Tour, it's probably that. It's just, even if I know something, and even if I get international work, even if I've got that experience, trying to help an organization through that evolution is quite a challenging task, and that taught me a lot.
It's kind of fascinating to hear you talk about part of that growth, part of the tour's growth, right, was hiring people from those countries or with that background in terms of nationality, where they grew up, or whether, we weren't hiring Americans. Well, in some cases, the tour was hiring Americans and putting them into those jobs. But I'm glad to hear you say part of that was also hiring people from other parts of the world.
Yeah.
Putting them into that position, right?
It's crazy interesting. It's even little things, Mark, like, okay, we're going to open an office in X country. What does their public holiday calendar look like? Yeah. How does it reflect that country's culture, their preeminent religions? And it's so funny because, you have, as you do that, you have to teach you kind of have to teach everybody internally within the organization, hey, here's what we're doing. We're opening an office in Tokyo, and here are some things that you should know about Japan. And it's, I never thought about things this way either. As your organization grows that way, being able to make sure that people that you're hiring internationally feel like they're also part of the family, it's a really, really steep task. And it's little things like that, like recognizing their culture, making that extra effort, that helps. But it's a steep effort, and I think it compounds as a company wants to be more ambitious and grows more.
You made that transition from the tour to EA, and you talked a little bit about EA a moment ago, and its standing and how well it's done here in the U.S. and perhaps the competition that exists outside of the States. I'd love to talk about EA and frankly, the more broad. It doesn't need to be focused on just on your company, but talk about your perspective on where esports and gaming and frankly even publishers, video game publishers, where can they be or should they be in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion? I think it's something that is an unknown for a lot. I mean, that space is an unknown for a lot of your traditional stick and ball sports executives and professionals. What's your perspective on where that gaming and publishing or publisher space could be better, or where they are now from a DEI perspective?
It's a really good question. It's funny because I think traditional sports and esports, probably because of the way that they've matured. I mean, traditional sports is way further ahead, but they've tended to cultivate a kind of like a little bit probably too homogenous of I guess a body of stakeholders, if I'm trying to be really broad. And it's not sports' fault. It's not like it decided to do that, but I think it's just the nature of a lot of sports that sort of created what it is today. And now, thankfully, there's lots of prominent DEI efforts to kind of help change that perception. And I think esports, and I'll even broaden beyond that. I'll even say video games, not as broad as tech, but I'll say the gaming industry has also historically seen some of that, in the sense of you're always going back to the same populations, you're going back to the same type of people. And I don't think people do this consciously, but when it comes to something like technology, where you need a lot of like hard technical skills, certain places breed that a lot better. And so I think as a company who is constantly trying to innovate, who needs the best talent in order to do so, will always fall back on those patterns. And, I will admit my thoughts on this were probably a little immature and naive, since I'm not technically, I'm absolutely a tech industry noob. But I'm now starting to see it too as I build out my team. Now, granted, esports is a little different from this video games. It is a subset of it, but at the same time, from a hiring perspective and a staffing perspective, I think it's still subject to the same or very similar nuances. You see very similar types of people come in. And so I think from that angle, video games and tech have a lot of introspection to do. That's not to say that it isn't already. I mean, diversity and inclusion is an incredibly important topic at EA, but I think it is that because EA is, like many other market leaders, are realizing, wow, years and years of this have really caught up to us. Just like sports, sports is kind of is having its moment now too. You look back and think, wow, this is what this industry is made up of now, really? And so I think it'll take a lot of work on gaming side. One of the ones that's probably most interesting that doesn't come up as much in gaming versus traditional sports is females. Gender equality is arguably much more difficult than not when it comes to gaming. And that is both on the playing side, staffing, everywhere. It's just the women are just not very prominent whatsoever in gaming and even tech in general. And so you kind of got to tackle those fundamental problems before we see it manifest in front of us at esports, which is a very small subset of gaming. But we'll see. And I think, but the industry certainly recognizes it, or if not the industry, certainly the market leaders. Even though we're always competing against each other, I can't tell you how many times I've seen of or heard of market leaders in the gaming industry collaborating on important initiatives such as diversity and inclusion.
It's fascinating to hear you talk about gender, Ron. I mean, that's something we have done a lot of research on. We've spoken with companies. We're far from experts in esports. We've only done about a half dozen searches over the last 3 years in esports. And what we've done as we've researched new companies to work with or new organizations to work with, you're right, the hiring side can continue to improve. But what we've learned, and you educate, me, and you educate others as well, the playing side, the athletes, right, the esports athletes. I mean, there's certainly a representation issue, but also from what I've heard, right, and some organizations do a much better job than others. But I know there's some there's certainly some organizations that have had trouble with how they treat each other, how the competitors treat each other, how they dialogue. And when you're in a competition, whether that be live, at a venue, for an esports venue, or it's online, there's some central pitfalls there, and it hurts the female population that wants to compete, and not just be fully employed there, but be competing with their male counterparts. And that's unfortunate. There's work to be
It
done.
happens at every level of it too. You're so right, Mark. And it's a huge topic of discussion for us. And we recognize it's not something we're gonna change overnight. If anything, it's gonna take a long time. But you've hit it on the point. In order to actually make in order to institutionalize real change in gender equality, it has to start at the bottom rung of grassroots participation, just like traditional sports in that way. It has to be okay and acceptable for everybody to have gender equality at all levels of participation. And when it comes to gaming, the more grassroots rungs of those tiers tend to be the internet. Yeah. And we all know what the internet can be like. You think about the demographics that we're working with, it becomes a much more environment it's an environment that is much more ripe for toxicity and putting more walls in front of women who want to enjoy video gaming. Yeah. And so I think esports has a tougher wall to climb there by nature of the beast. It doesn't mean we won't give up, because we do see a lot of success stories, but right now those success stories are way too few and far between.
Sure. Ron, I hope you don't mind me pivoting for our last question. This has clearly come to know your background even better over the last couple of years and through, and I know you won't boast of this, so I'll do it for you, but we came to know each other, and through a colleague at Prodigy, you were part of the business of diversity in sport and entertainment, the BDSE program within the National Sports Forum in 2019, a scholarship recipient, and again, a member of that group. I still believe you're involved. So what did that mean to you in terms of, the BDSE, including you being part of that process, still being involved? What's the value of a group like that? I'm always intrigued to hear from, the people that are part of it, not just the organizers or people that are recommending or saying you should apply, and, et cetera. What's that been like for you since 2019?
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Mark, because this sort of participation in efforts like this, initiatives like this, can be a one-off or a write-off for a lot of folks. You come in, do it, and maybe you follow up here and there, and maybe it fades in the rearview mirror. Could be, I don't know. In our day and age of conferences and conference sort of mentality tends to breed that. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that has kind of stuck out to me about the BDSE at the National Sports Forum is that it has really not been that whatsoever. I have maintained an unbelievably close contact with all of my cohort mates. We spend a lot of time still discussing pressing issues. We spend a lot of time helping each other out, helping each other's networks out. So from a personal and professional standpoint, or a personally professional standpoint, I suppose, it has been awesome. I love that something like this exists. I love that. I don't want to use the word teeth, because that makes it seem like this was supposed to build accountability. Yeah. But this is one of those sort of D&I initiatives that I feel like has had some sort of follow-up and has actually been doing what it's set out to do. I'm cognizant of its youth, and so the best is definitely yet to come for this initiative. But so far, it's been personally unbelievably satisfying to have a group of people that I can go to and speak to and have a sounding board for a lot of these sensitive topics that seem to be coming up more and more often. And that I really do appreciate. It's fantastic that these cohorts are full of business leaders, and we spend a lot of time cheering on each other's accomplishments. And so I'm excited, because I can see not only just my cohort, but that the type of people that are coming in this initiative are people who care. They may not be able to succeed at everything that they want to do when it comes to changing and improving D&I for across corporate America. I'm not even going to talk just sports. Of course, we're going to do it in sports, but I have confidence that change will be enacted because of this initiative. I can't predict exactly quite what that will look like, because a lot of the issues seem to be, no, the issues don't change. The way in which they're tackled may have to be, depending on how society evolves. But it's really happy. It brings me a lot of joy to know that there are a lot of people who think about this topic like I do. And I wish there was more of it. to be
Yeah, to
honest.
your point, but I think it's okay that you use that phrase or that word, right? I mean, I think it is about these organizations or these groups or initiatives that have teeth, but actionable items or takeaways and things that are sustainable over a long period of time aren't just because of what's happening, today. So we'll put something up on social media, or we'll create an initiative, put something up on our website, but we're really not going to follow through. There's not going to be continuation of this so that change does happen, right? So there needs to be something actionable, not just philosophical, I guess. And that's what I've liked about your involvement, other involvement that I've seen from people that I know in the BDSE program. So I appreciate you sharing that. I just was curious to hear from somebody that's been involved. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, the having the sort of partnership with the NSF and all the benefits that come come with that, I think has been really, really helpful. You can tell the steering committee of the NSF really cares about the BDSE, and I think that makes it seem like not a novelty whatsoever. Gives it a lot of validity, and it builds a lot of integrity into the initiative. So what Ron has done there with the steering committee has been nothing short of awesome. I'm lucky that I have personal friends on the steering committee too, and so I think as a result of that, I hear a lot of that information for the BDSE initiative too.
That's great. Listen, Ron, this has been tremendous. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, thank you for sitting on our DNI board. You and the others have added a lot of value to us over the last, I guess, since late 2019. And this interview series, it may not seem major to you, but it is a big deal to us because I think these 15, 20-minute conversations, if taken in, digested by those in our industry, they can have an impact. So I appreciate you telling your story today, and I wish you continued success. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks for the time, Mark. Always a pleasure.